Nights at the observatory always sound the same: the hum of ventilation, the click of relays, the occasional footsteps of the night watch. But at 3:17, the silence suddenly turned uneven, as if something invisible had started tapping on the glass of space itself. On the monitor, the spectrogram twitched, and a thin, bright needle rose where the universe's grey noise usually lay. The signal was brief, only a few seconds. Then it vanished. The watch officer was already reaching for the logbook, ready to write the usual word, interference, but the numbers managed to speak first. Exactly 143 minutes later, the needle appeared again. Same frequency, same shape, the same sharp signature, like someone else's handwriting. The third time it came back even more confidently, as if it were checking whether we were listening. And in that moment, the fear wasn't in the signal itself, but in one simple thought. If this isn't noise, then someone is already watching this way. In the morning, while the city was still asleep, Mia, the analyst, was already in the server room, where it smelled of dust, cold metal, and coffee that had cooled all the way down to just bitterness. She wasn't one of those romantics who dream of hearing aliens. Mia did the kind of work that sounds boring and saves projects. She cleaned data. Last night's knock from space could have been anything: a solar flare, satellite traffic, someone's radar, an instrument glitch. Her job was to prove it wasn't a sensation. That was exactly why people trusted her. Mia didn't fall in love with hypotheses. She pulled the raw receiver log, ran it through filters, stripping away anything earthly, known frequencies, navigation signals, orbital echoes. Then she checked what people usually check last: whether the anomaly was just the equipment repeating its own behavior. And the longer she crossed out possible causes, the more she was left with the one thing she didn't want left over: 143 minutes. Not roughly, not sometimes. Exactly, like a metronome. There was a knock at the server room door, short, without asking. Harris, the administrator, walked in, the facility administrator, a man with the kind of face that looks made for signing orders. He glanced at the monitor as if it weren't a graph, but a problem. "Mia," he said quietly, "you saw all this?" She nodded. "Then make it so this doesn't exist." He leaned against the rack of drives. "We're on a grant. We have a report. We have partners. And we have a rule: don't take the trash outside the isothermal dome." Mia wanted to snap back, but she held it in. She knew how careers collapse in science, not because of mistakes, but because of noise. One too bold post, one leak to the press, one word, aliens, and you're no longer a specialist, you're a meme. "It could be interference," she said, choosing dry, careful words. "But I don't yet see what kind." Harris watched her closely, as if weighing her. "At noon there'll be a call." "With the top." He said the word like a passcode. "And if you start talking about signals on that call, they'll pull you off the project. And with you, half the team. Your mom, I hear, is recovering from surgery? Where do you think your insurance comes from?" Mia felt anger rising inside her. Not bright, but cold, almost mathematical. "You want me to lie in the report?" she asked. "I want you not to blow this up into a catastrophe for everyone," Harris said. "Call it an instrument anomaly, or local interference pickup, any word that doesn't set off a chain reaction." Mia stayed silent, staring at the signal's needle like a hairline crack in glass. Her choice was simple only on paper. Close the case and keep everything that holds a life together, or dig deeper and risk becoming the person who heard something and paid for it. By noon, Mia already knew if she kept quiet now, she would stay quiet forever. Not because that's what you're supposed to do, but because every next step would only get harder. She hated these forks in the road. They look like morality plays, but in reality, they're just physics. Apply a small force at the right moment, and you change the trajectory. Wait too long, and later you'll have to tear up the rails. She went up to the control room, a glass box above the antenna hall.
It always felt like standing on the bridge of a ship gliding through black water.
At the console sat Ethan, the engineer, the duty engineer, the kind of guy who thought out loud and would argue even with a thermometer. Again? He asked the moment Mia walked in. In 7 minutes, she said, setting her laptop down beside him. We're going to try not to believe ourselves. Ethan smirked. That was their shared religion. While the timer counted down, Mia did the thing movies never show. She checked the boring basics everything depends on. She synced the receiver clock against the atomic time server, powered down half the local equipment, slewed the dish to a neighboring patch of sky, off to the side, where the signal shouldn't repeat if it really was a point source out in space. Then one more test. She brought up the backup receiver on a separate power line. If the needle appeared on both, it wasn't a single instrument glitch. If it's terrestrial, Ethan said, it should behave like something terrestrial. There'll be Doppler, there'll be jitter, there'll be grime. And if it's clean, Mia replied softly, it'll be too clean. Right then, the needle rose again on the spectrogram. It appeared simultaneously on 2 independent receivers, and it showed up even when the antenna was pointed off, as if the source were so distant and so broad that a slight shift meant nothing to it. Ethan froze, then leaned closer to the screen. It's narrowband. Very. Nature almost never does that. Mia nodded. Nature is noisy. Stars hiss, galaxies rumble, even pulsars, the most rhythmic things in the universe, have a telltale roughness. But this was a sound like a laser line, thin, nearly perfect. But that still doesn't mean someone, Mia said, even though that was exactly what she was thinking. It means too deliberate. She tapped another key and pulled up the phase difference, a small graph showing how the signal arrived across different elements of the array. It was a simple trick. If the source is far out in space, the wavefront reaches you almost flat, nearly the same everywhere. If it's nearby on Earth, you get shifts, reflections, the kind of messy echoes you'd hear when sound bounces off walls. The graph was smooth. Far, Ethan whispered. Mia felt her mouth go dry. Far meant no joker on Earth could hit them this cleanly and this consistently. Far meant either an impossible natural object no one had ever described, or someone's beacon. Harris stepped into the control room. Behind him came 2 men in identical grey jackets with no logos, faces too even, movements too calm. They didn't look like scientists. They looked like people who know how to close doors. I told you, Harris said. No theatrics. One of the grey men walked up to the monitor and studied the needle the way you'd study an ordinary number in a report. Have you been recording this? He asked. Mia didn't answer right away. A thought came back to her, an old idea a professor once explained in an astrophysics lecture. Back then, it sounded like philosophy. Now it sounded like a survival manual. If there are others in the universe, they think too, and they're afraid too. Which means the safest way to exist is to stay silent. Be quiet. Hide in the noise. Because anyone who loudly declares, I'm here, risks not finding friends, but attracting a hunter. The dark forest isn't a fairy tale. It's a strategy born of uncertainty. The grey man repeated the question, the politeness stripped away. Are you recording it or not? Mia looked at Ethan. For a second, it felt simple again. Say no and keep living. Or say yes and step into a place with only one rule. Any reply can become coordinates. She nodded slowly. Yes, and I have the full raw data. The grey man smiled as if he'd just gotten what he came for. Then Mia, the analyst, welcome to a conversation that should never have started. The grey men introduced themselves dryly. Communications liaisons. That's the polite label for people who don't come for knowledge, but for control. They didn't touch the equipment with their hands, only with their eyes and their questions. Mia noticed every time she said the word space, they flinched slightly, as if it were unnecessary poetry. In their improvised meeting room, a plain space with a whiteboard, Ethan drew an antenna, a source, little arrows with a marker. One of the grey liaisons silently filmed the graphs on his phone. "We need a probability assessment," he said at last. "Is it artificial?" Mia didn't want to play roulette with percentages, but the numbers were more stubborn than emotions. "Natural sources are usually broadband," she said. "They hiss across a range, the way a campfire crackles on a whole spread of frequencies at once. What we have is a single needle, and the timing repeats like a schedule. That looks more like a transmitter." Harris coughed, as if reminding her. "Careful." "So you're allowing for intelligence?" the second liaison asked. Mia looked at the signal needle on the printout, like evidence in a murder case. "I'm allowing for the fact that someone did this on purpose," she said. "Why they did it, we don't know. And that's the worst part." The Greys exchanged a glance. One of them said a sentence Mia never expected to hear inside a scientific observatory. "Then this is a security issue." And just like that, a new risk hung in the air. If it's security, then what comes next won't be papers and conferences, but orders and prohibitions. A signal from space abruptly became a signal inside the country, something you could use to figure out who's loyal and who isn't. Mia caught herself thinking, the dark forest doesn't begin only out there, among the stars. It begins in any system where knowledge is paid for with fear. 2 hours later, they were sitting in the equipment room, and Mia was doing something she hated, defending a hypothesis to people who weren't interested in truth. They were interested in leverage. Ethan pulled up a comparison against a database of celestial sources. Dozens of known emitters popped onto the screen. Pulsars, quasars, even Jupiter's singing radiation. One by one, Mia overlaid their voices on top of her signal, the way you match fingerprints. No match. "Maybe it's a new kind of object," Harris insisted, clinging to the life-saving comfort of natural. Mia paused, then pointed to a parameter. "If it's an object, it has to be rotating or pulsing on a 143-minute period. But then we'd see the signal shape change, drifting a little, like a lighthouse beam wobbling when waves cut across the light. Here the shape is identical every time, as if it's being copied." The liaison leaned in. "So, someone presses a button every 143 minutes. Either they have an automated system," Mia said, "or it's a beacon," and the word beacon sounded too peaceful. In a dark forest, a beacon isn't help. It's a marker. The next evening, Mia stayed alone. The Grey men were gone, but they'd left a gift. A small block clipped onto the network cable and a sheet of paper stamped restricted mode. External access was cut back. Logs began copying upstairs. Another guard appeared in the corridors. Mia opened the raw data again, not because she had to, but because otherwise she couldn't sleep. And suddenly, she noticed what had slipped past her in daylight. The signal had a faint asymmetry. Microscopic, but stable. The way a human voice has a timbre you can't mistake. She called Ethan over the internal line. "Look at the frequency drift," she said instead of hello. "It isn't zero." "Doppler." Ethan perked up. "If the source is moving relative to us, the frequency should shift a bit. But you said everything was clean." "Too clean," Mia replied. "That's why it's interesting. The drift isn't random. It's as if it's been corrected." They pulled up the plot. The frequency really did breathe in a rhythm that lined up strangely with Earth's rotation and its motion around the sun. Only it didn't line up perfectly, as if someone were compensating part of the Doppler effect, leaving a remainder behind. "Wait," Ethan looked up. "That means the source knows how we're moving?" Mia didn't say yes, but her silence was louder. If the transmitter isn't just broadcasting, but accounting for our motion, then either it's measuring us extremely well, or it's so far away and so precisely tuned that it can track us. Either way, the conclusion was ugly. They weren't simply shouting into the void. They were aiming. The first explanation, maybe it's natural, cracked for good. Nature doesn't compensate Doppler on purpose. Nature doesn't care about making itself easy to receive. "They're guiding us," Ethan said quietly. like a radio beacon guides a plane. And that was the second new realization. The signal wasn't a message, it was a targeting tool. On the third day, different people arrived, not gray, black, uniforms without extra details, confident strides, as if the territory already belonged to them. Mia was standing by the window when she heard, "The comms room. Now." Ethan nervously wiped his hands on his jeans, like he was heading into an exam. A colonel sat inside. His name didn't matter. Men like that all looked the same. A folder of printouts lay on the table. "We have a proposal," the colonel said without preamble. "If this is a beacon, we can use it. We can reply." Mia felt her cold anger turn almost hot. "To reply is to announce that we're here," she said. "And not just here, but how to find us." "This isn't a philosophical question," the colonel cut her off. "It's an initiative question. Whoever speaks first sets the rules." Ethan couldn't hold back. "And if, in a dark forest, the first one to speak is the first one to die?" The colonel looked at him the way you look at static. "You've read too much science fiction." Mia understood the argument wasn't about the signal. It was about who got to hold the reply button. And if she gave way, tomorrow the news would talk about humanity's heroic message, and the day after about an accident at the station where, suddenly, inexplicably, all the data vanished. The third fact, the arrival of a force that wanted to act, turned a scientific problem into a political one. Now the danger wasn't only in space, it sat at the table and wore insignia. That night, Mia and Ethan went back to the graphs again, but now as a weapon of defense. If they could prove that replying was literally coordinates, maybe they could buy time. Mia sketched a simple model. Radio waves travel at the speed of light. For anyone to answer us, they first have to receive our hello, which means any conversation across dozens of light years is a correspondence with decades of delay. "But that's if it's honest," Ethan said. Mia nodded. "And if it's a trap," she continued, "they don't need a dialogue. They need a fact. Someone is here. The beacon could be old, automatic. It could run for centuries. It isn't waiting. It's marking." On the board, she drew circles, waves spreading outward from Earth. The stronger we transmit, the farther we can be heard. And the key isn't that someone hears us. The key is that a signal gives you direction. It's not like hearing noise in a forest. It's like seeing the flash of a flashlight. "The narrower the beam, the more precise," Ethan added. "Yes," Mia said, "and any reply is a narrow beam. We'd make ourselves a bright dot on a map." The fourth realization hit almost physically. Replying isn't just saying hello, it's voluntarily stepping out of the shadows. In a dark forest, that can be a death sentence, even if no aliens are flying toward us right now, because it only takes one listener to decide it's easier to erase a rival than to take a risk. Mia glanced at the clock. 20 minutes remained until the next pulse. And somewhere in the building, they were already debating what text to send in reply. Her heart was beating faster than the 143-minute metronome, because the price of knowledge had become clear. You can understand what must not be done, but you can't force other people not to press the button. The next pulse arrived, as always, precisely on schedule. Mia watched it now, not as a mystery, but as a knife someone carefully sets on the table, again and again, checking whether we'll pick it up. The colonel sat in the comms room waiting for the window. A guard was posted in the corridor. Harris had disappeared, and that was a bad sign. It meant he'd already signed what he didn't want to sign. Mia and Ethan managed one more check, a last desperate one. They compared not only frequency and phase, they stacked the pulses on top of each other, millisecond by millisecond, the way an investigator overlays video frames to see whether something is fake or real. And they saw something strange. Inside each clean pulse, there was a microscopic tremor. Too small to notice by eye, but repeating. A rhythm inside a rhythm. Ethan said first what Mia was afraid to hear. "It's not one signal. It's two." Mia zoomed in even further. And it became clear. Riding on top of the main needle was a second, weaker emission, like a whisper under a shout. It didn't share the 143-minute period. It was always there with the beacon. But it trembled in its own way, as if trying to hide inside someone else's wave. Like a parasite, Ethan said, like someone's using the beacon as transport. Cold ran down Mia's spine. If that was true, it wasn't simply someone and us. It was a system, an ecosystem, a hunt. She remembered a basic rule from radio work. If you have a powerful carrier, you can ride another signal on it. This is how jamming works, how piggybacking works, how covert channels work. A faint voice hides inside a loud one, and anyone who doesn't know where to look hears only the big, obvious beacon. So the beacon isn't a message, Mia said quietly. It's bait. And everything flipped. If the beacon is bait, its purpose isn't to find friends. Its purpose is to make someone answer, to make someone stick their head out of the shadows, to make someone visible. And that hidden second signal might not be a parasite. It might be a watcher, not listening to us, listening for those who can't stand silence. Mia stood up so abruptly, her chair squeaked. They're testing who's foolish, she said, and who's hungry for contact, and who's confident enough to press the button. Ethan went pale. So, if we reply, the reply won't be heard only by them. It'll be heard by whoever hunts the ones who reply. Mia stared at the screen, where the countdown ticked toward the end of the pulse. Now, their old strategy, just stay quiet and figure it out, wasn't merely caution. It was the only chance. Because the danger wasn't somewhere far ahead, not in decades of flight. The danger was built into the structure of the situation itself. They were being pulled into a move where losing wasn't an error in a report, but a mark on a map. And the worst part, the colonel was already preparing a reply, not out of malice, out of the conviction that initiative would save them. Mia realized she had two options left. The first, persuade people who didn't know how to fear the unknown. The second, make sure there simply wouldn't be a reply button today, and it was a choice with no good outcomes. Because in a dark forest, even silence sometimes demands violence. Lara didn't run through the corridors, only people who still believe they can make it in time run. She walked fast and steady, like someone who'd already made the choice and was now simply carrying it out. The comms room was locked. A guard stood at the door as if he weren't protecting metal, but the right to speak on behalf of the planet. Mia stopped and lifted a folder of printouts. The colonel asked me to deliver a Doppler correction, she said calmly. It matters before transmission, unless you want your reply to miss the addressee. The guard hesitated for a second, and it was the longest second of the night. Then the lock clicked. Inside, the colonel and two operators were already dialing in the transmitter settings. On the screen, readiness indicators blinked. Power, bandwidth, timing. 5 minutes remained until the next window. Too late, the colonel said when he saw her. We're acting. Mia set the folder on the table as if surrendering. She stepped closer, and in that moment, Ethan, still downstairs, followed her cue and cut the external time synchronization. Just for a second. For ordinary communications, it would have been a nuisance. For a precise reply on a narrow frequency, it was a disaster. The transmitter drifted. Warnings began to spill across the screen. Desynchronization, phase loss, drift. One operator swore and tried to restore the mode, but the safety interlock had already tripped. The system built to keep the hardware from frying suddenly became their ally. It blocked the transmission on its own. What did you do? The colonel shot to his feet so fast his chair skidded back. Mia didn't retreat. I removed the button, she said. For one night. So you wouldn't turn us into a beacon. The colonel stepped toward her, and for a moment, Mia saw not anger in his eyes, but the fear of a man who's used to controlling everything, who has just realized that space doesn't take orders. Do you understand this is sabotage? He asked quietly. That's a tribunal. I do, Mia said. But I also understand that replying is handing over coordinates, and if it really is a dark forest out there, then the most expensive sentence in the universe is, "I'm here." They took her away quickly. No shouting, no handcuffs on display, the way they take people no one later writes about in the news. Harris wouldn't meet her eyes. Ethan tried to step forward, but they held him back. The next day, her name turned gray in the access system. The project continued, as normal. In the reports, the signal became an instrument anomaly. And over the antennas, night silence settled again, until the next pulse. Mia sat in a small windowless room and thought about the simplest thing. Humanity has always dreamed that contact would be the beginning of friendship. But maybe a species becomes mature not when it learns to speak, but when it learns to be silent at the right moment. Because in a dark forest, it isn't monsters that are dangerous. It's the flashlights we turn on ourselves, so someone will notice us.